Moroccans go to the polls again to choose a new parliament and new local councils. It comes more than a decade after the country had its own version of the Arab Spring, here called the February 20th movement. But will these elections have any impact when King Mohammed VI retains so much control? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to a special Inside Story from Morocco's capital, Rabat. I'm Bernard Smith. On Wednesday, millions of Moroccans will vote in the third elections following the Arab Spring more than 10 years ago. Since then, the socially conservative Party of Justice and Development has led the government. But that looks set to change as a party considered close to the palace could win the largest share of seats in Parliament. In a moment, we'll meet our guest, but first, I've been out to meet some young Moroccans on the campaign trail. It takes commitment and patience to canvass for votes in the Moroccan town of Saleh.
It's becoming really hard to convince people just to trust us as a youth.
Sofiane Ferez is one of 4 first-time candidates in Morocco's elections who came of age during the Arab Spring more than a decade ago. They believe little has changed, a view, it seems, shared by the people they're trying to persuade to vote.
They don't believe in the elections itself and all this theater of the elections. They are like tired of it. They are all times like see the same people getting elected, old people, corrupted, like symbolize the corruption in Saleh.
More than half of people in Morocco believe corruption has got worse in the last 12 months, according to Transparency International. But critics say it's hard to tackle when there's no accountability at the top.
We continue to live in an exceptional despotism. For example, we say that it is essential to discuss the budget of the royal palace. We are against a budget we can't talk about. We say that the king should not be at the center of political life because those that are should be accountable to the public.
King Mohammed VI appoints the government, and those who don't toe the line don't get very far. Rachid from Morocco's Institute for Policy Analysis believes many people in Morocco have watched closely what's happened in neighbouring countries since the Arab Spring.
There is a majority of young voters who won't vote because they're not convinced by the way the game is played now. But don't forget that if one day we do manage to master the game, we manage to control the elites and the street, perhaps they'll be convinced that we should go back to a much stronger autocracy.
These young politicians believe there is appetite for change despite the risks.
We must have another referendum for a new constitution because in our current one there are many political and constitutional imbalances. If we get a majority in parliament, we would apply strong pressure for real constitutional reforms.
The system designed to stop any party getting a majority, such radical policies are unlikely to get very far. Let's bring in our guests. Rachid Touhtou is Professor of Communications at the National School of Statistics and Applied Economics in Rabat. And also joining us is Noufal Aboud. He's Executive Director of the Nordic Centre for Conflict Transformation. And our third guest is Elizabeth Myers, Adjunct Associate Professor of Law at American University's Washington College of Law. Welcome to you all. Rachid, I'll begin with you, if I may. Whoever wins this election or has the most number of seats in Parliament, will they have any real power?
I think that we are living now in the Moroccan environment, politically speaking. It's a post-2011 elections after adopting the famous 2011 constitution, where we think as politicians and researchers that there is more power to the executive branch headed by the chief of government, but we still are in the traditional framework where the king has executive powers too. So whoever win the coming elections, we need a very charismatic, very powerful chief of government as a leader who will lead the whole government and negotiate with the king to listen to his powers and gain more powers in what we call the golden square of power, which is the palace.
Okay, Noufal, are Moroccans persuaded that it's going to be worth voting?
Definitely, this is very important time for Morocco. It's after 10 years from the adoption of the constitution that came right after the Arab uprisings at that time. What is important also is the context in which this election comes within the international trends of democracy. There is a State of Democracy report that has been released by the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance based in Sweden that actually says that the quality of democracy is decreasing. There is an erosion in political representation worldwide, and that the pandemic, COVID pandemic, is actually just limiting a lot of freedoms worldwide. What we are looking here in Morocco is not really the quality of the democratic process to be advanced, but actually to protect the democratic institutions that were established and developed within the Constitution of 2011. We have seen nearby how democracy in elections has not really led to very much of democratic development in the region. Tunisia, for example, as an example of that, we have seen the backslide of democracy in Tunisia just right after the suspension of the democratic institution by the president himself. So what we are looking here is actually to limit the threshold of the backsliding, if there is any. And that can be done either by having a coalition of governments, more inclusion, and on the other side, having an institution that uses a unicity of power with a consular institution, which is the royal institution, that actually limits the backslide and the changes within the political system in Morocco.
Okay, well, so Elizabeth Neufeld suggesting that it's important to protect whatever was won after the 20th February movement. Do you think Moroccans really believe there's going to be any change, whoever they vote for?
Unfortunately, I really don't. I sort of circulate in a mix of the different levels and echelons of society here in Morocco. And there's so many people who I've spoken to who just have absolutely no interest in it because they see that there's no change coming whatsoever. After 2 terms of the PJD party, they really feel that no matter who gets in, it's going to be more of the same. And there's a huge lack of trust. The Moroccan Institute for Policy just issued a trust index, and a huge lack of trust in the government and in elections themselves. And we see that also when there's corruption, for example, when people are paid for their votes. And we see that all over the place, in the small douars near me. And that's a lot of money, even though it's 100, 150 dirhams. It's a lot of money to poor people. And that kind of corruption undermines the trust in the democratic process, unfortunately.
Rachid, there is plenty of evidence to suggest that people are being paid to vote for particular parties. And we come to this election with this new law that's going to allocate votes differently. Essentially, votes will be allocated on the number of people registered to vote rather than those who actually cast a vote. Is this just another way of trying to hobble the PJD, the Justice and Development Party that's been in power for the last...
I think we had a strong debate and even very contentious debate before the adoption of the new organic law by the new government. Unfortunately, it has been adopted, and the only party that has refused is the ruling party. The PJD has completely refused changing the laws. What we call I think, the electoral quotient is in my eyes, a way to limit the potential power of the PJD. Because if we've, and taken into consideration the history of elections in Morocco, and it's just from 2011, we've witnessed that the PJD got 1.5 million votes, which are their activists who are, it's a stagnant block of votes that will vote no matter what the PJD will rule, will win, or will fail in the come. So I think what we call in Arabic the Qasim Intikhabi, or the electoral quotient, is directly meant to limit the electoral power of the Islamists in Morocco.
Rachid, is that what the palace and the king's advisors want to do, and the interior minister who introduced this law? They want to stop the PJD, the Justice and Development Party, advancing further in these elections?
To be realistic, it's only when the election is over that we can actually assess whether the electoral quotient was actually meant against the PJD or not. What we know now is actually the religious discourse in politics has diminished its effect in Morocco. Second thing is that the electoral reform that has happened in Morocco does not only concern the electoral quotient. It concerns other things, such as, for example, the decomposition of the national list in favor of the regional list at the parliament, which means that because of the women political representation at the parliament was actually very low at the parliament, the changes to use the regional list or local list where the women representation is about 37 to 38% will be in the benefit of women political participation at the parliament. Do we increase, for example, the seats for women reserved at the parliament from, for example, within the regional list from 3 to 12 as a minimum? And there are other things. What we are going to see actually now is more political participation and seats for women, and especially at the parliament when the first seats and second seats are mandatory reserved for women. So the electoral reform does not only concern the electoral quotients. We need to wait and see, because on the previous elections, there was a debate again about some electoral lists, and they said the PJD was against it. But here, the process was democratic. It was voted for it. The PJD is continuing to be engaged within the political system in Morocco. And this is politics. You know, elections is a political process, highly political process, and it depends on establishing coalitions and negotiating the positions.
Okay, Elizabeth, this religious aspect to political parties, to politics in Morocco has diminished, as Noufal says. But why this continual suspicion of the Justice and Development Party? The king is not a fan. There is this lingering suspicion. Why can't it shake it off?
Well, they've been in power for 2 terms, right? They've won the past 2 elections since the new constitution came into effect. And a lot of people see that nothing's happened. Very little has happened. The only thing they've really seen is sort of the constitutional reforms that are in the document, right? But actually implementing those reforms is down to the government. So the question is, what is the best party? What is the best coalition? Who are the best leaders to implement these reforms that are supposed to be implemented?
But have they not been implemented because they've not been allowed to implement them by the palace, by the executive? Is that the problem?
So I think that's a little beyond my pay grade to suggest that it would be because they're not allowed to. I think that there is a lack of will to do it. I will hearken back to the King's speech, the Throne Day speech, I think it was last year, where the King was talking about we need public servants in Morocco who will serve the public. This is the problem. You have people who are being elected to government who are not interested in serving the public. They're more interested in getting, their money or buying a villa or whatever the end results of the corruption there is.
Okay. And Noufal, have the PJD been stopped from implementing policies?
Hobbled. One of the issues that other political parties who are against the PJD did not bring in is actually the evaluation of the terms of PJD as leading the government. It hasn't been the case. And also, what we have seen is how weak all the political parties are weak in terms of how to prepare policies within Morocco, and that how this is the king and the royal institution that are preparing policy for this country. And the third thing is that the political campaign, of course, it was limited by the COVID-19. In the political campaign, we still build the campaign based on promises. And the Moroccans are really tired of promises. They want to see something concrete. They need to be engaged in a debate about a correct debate and realistic debate about the political delivery of government. Unfortunately, all political parties do not provide something really realistic. What is very important here, and I would just like to comment on Elizabeth, what is important, and I think it's a gain in Morocco, is whatever we are talking about it now, is a part of a very engaged debate in social media. And we haven't witnessed something like this in social media. Whether it's a good debate or a negative debate, it's a debate and it's engagement within the political framework.
Quickly, go ahead,
I wanted to add, though, the result, perhaps, of the parliamentary type shuffles where the king can sort of shuffle people around and remove them and put someone else in and all of that. I think that does serve in practical terms to hobble the government to some degree, because the king has the ultimate say.
As Rachid, do you think, we've talked about the PJD's failure to implement policy, are they going to be punished at the polls by the electorate?
I think just coming to some comments of my colleague, you know, we forgot that also there was the organic law of the threshold, like 3% was eliminated, which means that any political party, in fact, can join the game. I've looked at the statistic just briefly, you know, only 4 big political parties could cover Morocco 100%. But when we go, the more we go down to regions and to low municipalities, no political party could cover the whole of Morocco. And here we see how the Ministry of Interior proposed laws can in fact diminish the mobilization factors of any political party. Coming to the fact that the PJD did the evaluation, I agree with Naufal, presented to the public, it's on Facebook, it's everywhere, but there was no public debate about evaluating. And we should not forget that during the 2011 government led by Ben Kiran, there was a lot of obstacles put, you know, not to pass some laws. We remember the famous story of the cahier de charge of the telecommunication, that the king himself interfered and called for the Minister of Communication in the palace to tell him, stop there, it's not your prerogative. We remember the story with Akhnes, with the Minister of Agriculture, the famous one now, where he got 47 milliards from the ministerial portfolio, and Belkina refused to sign, but the king again intervened and tell him, no, he has to hold the signature. So I said, any political party in Morocco, historically, cannot have a big impact, no matter what, you know, money is there, no matter what political ideology or campaigning to the people, because the palace has played, and it is playing a big role in taming political parties and in controlling the result. You know, we talked about money, vote buy-in, which is unfortunately everywhere now. I attend everyday campaign in a small rural area. It's every day. Gerrymandering.
Yes.
You know, the Minister of Interior controls the elections, the input and the output, you know, and the charismatic leadership of the king, being Amir al-Mu'mineen, and being an executive monarchy in the new constitution, really limits any powerful change or impact. Of course, I say the PJD did what they could do. You know, I'm not defending the PJD, but this is the political structure is a problem.
That was very quickly. I was going to ask you, Naufal, has the PJD, did it do what it could do? Had it played its hand badly? Could it have done better? Or was it just stuck?
Well, of course they can do better. And all of that is based on how they negotiate the power within the framework of a kingdom where the king has also very strong power. And also, you know, the political system in Morocco has its own specificities, is that, yes, we have a modern system based on separation of power with the parliament, government, and the judiciary, and where the political parties can play a very important role. But also, there is a system in which, within the framework of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the commander of the faithful, and which is working for more than 16 years since the establishment of Morocco as a kingdom, and it is based on unicity of power with councillors. So the nuances about power in the country has to be negotiated.
Okay. Elizabeth, we probably have, there's going to be a coalition of some sort after this election. It could be even weaker than previous coalitions. Is that how to advance Morocco's democracy and economy with such probably weak coalitions, trying to please everyone at the same time and the palace?
Well, unfortunately, the coalitions are trying to have agreements of the unlike-minded, as one analyst recently put it. And that's exactly how it is. When you're trying to come up with some kind of consensus, you're going to naturally graduate or devolve to the lowest common denominator. You know, but coming from a country, the US, that has basically a two-party system, you know, I think the more it's diluted, the less Morocco will be able to implement the sorts of things that need to actually happen. And I would hope also that some of the individual liberties that are enumerated in the 2011 Constitution become a little bit more in the forefront of the people who are actually running. Women's rights. There's still issues with women's rights in the country. Many issues.
All right, time is against us, but let's quickly talk about how much of a threat. Let's talk quickly about how much of a threat the National Rally of Independence is. The talk is that they may be the ones who get most of the seats in Parliament. Billionaire businessman and agriculture minister As Akhnes, its leader. How different could he be? Would he be as hobbled as the PJDs, or Rachid, could he really make a difference, Rachid?
Yeah, I think the RNI as a political party has been as old as all parties, and we have to remind spectators about their genesis as a party that came from the palace. It was born from the palace, and then they were in the parliament. So it's As Akhnes is trying to work on the legitimacy or renewing the legitimacy of RNI, especially after the Arab Spring. And after the PJD is putting its popular legitimacy on the ground. So any political party now cannot just come like this. They have to come from the people, and they have to work on a certain legitimacy. So As Akhnes has worked from 2009, and I think the scenario has been there. But this Arab Spring curtailed the scenario of pushing either RNA or PAM, which is the Party of Authenticity and Modernity, into a power. Now all the lights are on As Akhnes. They are leading a very professional campaign. Of course, they have the money. They are present in the social media. There is a report that has said they are the ones who are heavily present in the media. But just the last Facebook speech of Ben Kiran, the ex-president of the PJD and the chief of government, I think has attacked As Akhnes directly. So it means for me, there is really a political dilemma inside what we call the golden square of power in Morocco, whether As Akhnes will lead the coming government or not.
Okay, Rachid, could Naufal, could Akhnes be the leader that could be more charismatic and capable of standing up to the executive, the palace?
I think I look at it more from the receiver of the policies, the new policies. The receiver of new policies is something really new in Morocco, which is actually the strength of social movements. We don't have to forget that the social movement is what inhibited the change and the constitutional reform in Morocco. It is less studied on how social movements are actually changing the politics in the countries. This is the Arab uprisings. We have seen it also in the US, for example, with Donald Trump, and how the social movements in the US have pushed away the president of the United States and even called for kind of coup against beyond the democratic system. So
they attempted the coup.
Well, attempted the coup through a social movement. I think anybody who will be able to attract the social movement or young people and young women and men in Morocco is the one who will have more impact. Until today is the royal institution that is doing that.
Elizabeth, do you agree? Do you follow what he agree with what he says about that, about social movements working here? Being effective?
I think there have been many social movements, and a lot of them have been quelled, especially, for example, Amazigh social movements. But that's where the power is. The power of the people is there. And I think what I've seen with the RNI Hamama party is they're all over social media. They're all over YouTube. And they're doing an election. It's not an election. It's a voter education campaign. They're reaching out specifically to women. And women are 43% of the electorate here. And that's a huge factor. And as a lawyer and somebody who really is committed to democracy and the rule of law and trying to help people understand what it is, I really think we need to have more women, more youth be able to begin to trust the system by seeing some results, by seeing some respect for human rights and freedom of the press, but all of these things that are the foundations of a democracy. And yes, this is a constitutional monarchy, but a lot of those powers have been delegated to the government, and they need to be able to be implemented with people given their rights. And the more rights they feel they have, the more economic opportunities they have, the less you're going to see these social movements that are disruptive.
Folks, I'm very sorry. Time, unfortunately, has got the better of us, but thanks to all of our guests, to Rachid Touhtou, to Noufal Aboud, and to Elizabeth Myers. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the programme again by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for more debate, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. I'm Bernard Smith from the team here in Morocco. Thanks for watching.